maybe also make Jessica and Kim co-host as well, if you have a moment there.
Yep, we're all set.
Okay, cool. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome. It's so nice to see everyone. I'm Jenna Koloski. I'm the Community Engagement and Policy Director at the Vermont Council on Rural Development. If you have joined Community Leadership Network workshops in the past, you may remember that often the person opening these meetings was John Copans, who really kind of was the one on our team who developed and launched this leadership network. And John is no longer at VCRD. He has a really cool job running the Old Spokes home up in Burlington. Definitely a passion project for him. I'm pretty sure his house is full of old bike parts, and so now he gets to do that professionally. So we're very happy for him. And it means that I get to take on this really cool job of helping to manage the Vermont Community Leadership Network. And so for anyone who may be new to these network workshops, so Vermont Council on Rural Development is a neutral convener of public and community process in Vermont. We do work some at the kind of statewide policy level around issues that are impacting and affecting rural Vermont, but the core and heart of our work is really in working directly with communities all around the state. In fact, we were in Highgate on Tuesday night, and then last night we were up in Brownington, and get to travel all around the state, helping communities to come together, identify priorities, advance community initiatives and projects. It's really fun work. And what we know about that work, what we've learned over time, is that the only reason any of that is successful is because of the people on the ground, all of you, that are working to advance community initiatives in your towns and volunteering on municipal committees and taking on these really important initiatives for the future. It really is a unique and special part of what makes Vermont, Vermont. And so when the pandemic shifted the way that we could interact with each other and actually got us kind of out of communities for a little while, we launched this Vermont Community Leadership Network to help to connect folks around Vermont that are doing that work at the community level. And so both to provide kind of skills and workshops and bring tools and resources to all of you, but mostly to connect all of you to learn from each other and hear what you all are up to in your own communities. I think there are so many challenges that have come along with COVID, but I think this is one perhaps little bright spot outcome that, like, oh, there are ways that we can connect people across the state in ways that we never had before. And so just really value so many of you, spending your morning together and thinking about these important issues that make this work possible. If you are not a member of the Vermont Community Leadership Network, you should consider joining so that you can kind of continue to get updates about workshops. We also host cohorts of kind of leaders working in different spaces. We have a cohort of climate catalysts working on climate solutions in their communities. Right now, a cohort of task force leaders that have emerged through our community engagement processes. So to stay in touch, I think Alyssa's got a link she'll put in the chat to the Community Leadership Network. So feel free to join there to get on our list to share these updates regularly. On that website, you'll also find all of the recordings from past workshops that we've held and any updates as new workshops are populated on there. And we do plan to have another workshop coming up in June that we'll announce soon. So enough of the background, let's launch into the content for today. I do want to mention a couple other staff members that are on the call here. We have Alyssa Johnson, who you'll hear from momentarily. We also have Jessica Savage with us, who's another program director with UCRD, and then Kim Roop, who is our new development and communications leader at VCRD, and they're all here to help run this conversation and facilitate some breakout conversations later on. So thanks to all of you for being on the call. And the plan for today. So the topic for this morning is engaging with municipal leadership in your community. Now, this is something that we have seen over time in the communities that we're working with that is so critical, and also is a real challenge in a lot of ways. That, you know, when community initiatives emerge, you know, we have community volunteers stepping up. You have these, you know, amazing municipal leaders that kind of commit themselves to these long-term roles in communities, and where municipal leadership and community volunteers are able to coordinate, connect with each other, line up together, that's where that kind of real magic happens and real, you know, where things can really move forward in a coordinated and connected way. And we often hear really wonderful success stories of communities working together in that way, but also a lot of questions and challenges coming up about how, you know, how do we gain, you know, municipal support for this initiative we're working on, or, you know, we already are working together, but it's confusing who's doing what and what are the roles and responsibilities and what's even legal in terms of how you can work together. And so we figured, hearing so many of those questions, it might make sense to bring you all together this morning, share some insight. We're going to first hear from Alyssa Johnson with VCRD. So Alyssa is both on our team, but also a select board member in Waterbury. And she is going to share really kind of a big picture overview. Why is this important? What have we seen in our work with communities that is kind of some tips and strategies that we've seen have worked or not worked. And so she'll kind of share that overview. But then we also brought two speakers to share their experience with you, like real on the ground experience around trying to make this work. So we have Lindley Brainerd from Bethel, who's both who is a Bethel Revitalization Initiative member, so a kind of local volunteer group, but also select board member and business owner in the community. So I've asked her to kind of share how that relationship between community volunteerism and a municipality has formed over time there. And then we have Michael Wright with us from Bradford. Michael serves on the Municipal Bradford Recreation Commission and is also chairing a task force that emerged from a community engagement process in Bradford that is focused on expanding recreation facilities and programming in the town. And so he'll kind of share his experience navigating those two different roles and the folks involved in those different initiatives. And then what we plan to do, so we want to hear some key takeaways from their work, but then we really want to hear from all of you. So right around 11, and you totally understand if you need to jump off the call then, we'll give you that opportunity. But for those that want to dig in together and have a conversation about this, stick around and we'll have a half an hour to do some breakout conversations. So we'll separate into smaller groups and really, you know, walk through like, what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing, workshopping some solutions and ideas together. You know, what's worked, what do you think, you know, you could try in your community to improve connection and collaboration, and then talk about some key takeaways from the speaker and the conversation, some things that you might, you know, take back to your own communities. And then we'll just come back for a final kind of share back to the larger group, and then we'll close. So that's the plan for the session. I think what I'll do is hand it over to Alyssa, unless Alyssa, I'm missing anything I should say in intro or plan here, and let Alyssa walk through some tips and strategies for you.
Awesome. No, I think we're all set. Thank you so much, Jenna, and hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As Jenna said, I'm a community projects associate at the Council on Rural Development, which in particular does a lot of follow-up work with community groups coming out of our community visit process. And as Jenna said, I'm also on the select board in Waterbury. I see a couple names I recognize from Waterbury, so shout out to you folks. Thanks for being here. In addition to being on the select board, I was also the planning commission chair in Waterbury for a year and worked as the town's economic development director. So have been to a fair amount of municipal meetings and just excited. I'm going to walk through 2 slides quickly just to give some general overview points from my experience, from our experience at VCRD, In general at VCRD, we also understand that every community is a little different. So I will say we're defining engagement and municipal leadership really broadly. You know, a select board is one type of formal governing board, but, you know, I also work with our water sewer commissioners. Maybe it's a planning commission. And again, engagement can look in a lot of different ways. So just want to understand that this is something that works in some contexts, and maybe there's some takeaways for you, or maybe it's also different for your community. So just going to go ahead and share those slides. So here we are. Sorry, it's the two screen thing. So why engage? Hopefully, if you're here, you at least think there's some value to engaging with your municipality, but I really want to sell you on it just in case you kind of had any doubts coming in. You know, the first reason for that is simply to build community engagement and support. I think it's pretty clear in our Vermont communities, and you all are very familiar, but local municipal leaders are also part of your community, and community residents and neighbors, like any folks in your community. That means we have certain areas we might be really familiar with and others that we might be less familiar with. So, you know, at the most basic level, by being in touch with these folks, you're helping to keep them informed of work that you're doing in your community, and, you know, creating a more comprehensive vision of what's happening in the community. Again, this can really help develop relationships. Relationships can be really important to some of the bigger asks that we'll get to in terms of value with municipal partnership. And, you know, by being in touch and engaging and having that communication, you're allowing that relationship to develop over time. You know, down the road, as we work with community groups, a lot of the things that happen, particularly if you're trying to, you know, really engage with a number of folks in your community, maybe do a pop-up project or something that's going to gain a lot of attention. Some of those areas in particular sometimes involve maybe your local park, your local roads, asking to close a road. Maybe you want to install sculptures or artwork. And at the most basic level, some of those need approvals from local governing boards. And so, you know, that's not the only reason to have a relationship. But again, while you're building this community awareness and starting those relationships, that also can help provide a pathway for that. In the same vein, again, a lot of my work at a certain point also gets to working with community groups who are looking to access funding. And there's certainly a variety of avenues for doing that. And through a town or municipality is not the only one, but there are specific funding sources that do either require potentially a town to be an applicant or to have town support in a letter or some other form. And so again, if you're looking long-term at a potential item, those might not be concerns that are coming up right now for you as a group. But by investing early in developing a relationship with your municipality, it potentially opens a lot of avenues for that type of work moving forward. They also can be really reciprocal relationships. So volunteer select board members, we have a lot of on our plate. And so while you're thinking about all of the logistics that go into running and managing and maintaining a municipality day to day, whether you have a lot of local staff or you're taking on a lot of that work as select board members in smaller communities, there's often more initiatives than we could ever as a group take on. And so by understanding what other groups in the community might be digging into, that gives us a more comprehensive picture of, okay, we might have less time or energy to focus on a specific issue, but it's really good to know that there's a group of community members really invested in that. And maybe there's a way for us to partner or just stay up to date and kind of avoid duplicating services or be a little more strategic in that way. And ultimately, I mean, this is the big sell, right? The transformative change that we've seen in communities through VCRD, but also just across the state, really in most cases at a broad scale, comes ultimately from a partnership between local grassroots community volunteers, and that at a certain point also bringing in those local leaders. And so we've seen this happen in a bunch of different communities. Jenna can share more about it, but from, you know, housing in St. Johnsbury to programs in Burke and really just all across the state, the places where we've really seen these transformative changes have come ultimately from that partnership between the two. So hopefully that's enough to sell you. Now let's get a little more into just kind of like, what are some of those logistics day to day? if I have one takeaway from this meeting, it is communicate early. And just to say, Jenna just said we were in Brownington last night. I personally did not have cell service there. As we got home at 9:15, I had 5 different text messages and emails from fellow select board members about our upcoming agenda for Monday, because inevitably time-sensitive things come up that we need to manage. But that being said, it can be really challenging. It doesn't always give us the amount of time to comprehensively think about and plan for something. And it can be really stressful when you get a request that is really time sensitive. So the earlier in the process you can engage, the better. It also can make it a lower, maybe a less stressful ask. So you don't always have to go in, we talked about maybe down the road you want to partner with a town for funding or to get a formal approval, but it can be really nice to start that relationship without having a particular ask on the table. Sometimes it's really nice to just go in and say, hey, we're a community group working on a specific topic. Is there anyone else already working on this topic? Maybe there is another community group and someone on a local board might be able to help make that connection or let you know someone else already working on that. It can also be a nice opportunity for your group to maybe ask advice from a board, kind of have this two-way communication. So it's not just you providing an update, it's really engaging in a dialogue about both things. Share the purpose of the communication. So again, it doesn't need to be, hi, we are community group X and we're seeking an approval for, a pop-up event in the next 2 weeks. If it is, that's great. And sharing that up front can be really useful, but you could also just say, this is an informational update. For me, I find it really useful just in terms of the framing. Is this time sensitive? When's it's going to come up? In general, I will say also, these are kind of communication best practices in general with any group you might encounter, but also certainly translates to your local elected or volunteer officials. Be clear and concise. A lot of us are getting a lot of emails. Again, you as community members and your local volunteers. So again, sharing upfront, okay, what is the purpose of this? What's the topic? Is there a specific ask? And then sharing more detail as appropriate. It came up again, communicate early, because really sometimes things come up, things have to get pushed to a later agenda. And so the sooner you can be ahead of the curve, it just lowers the tenor of the communication. Again, both overall in a process as you're forming an idea, and then also, maybe there is a grant deadline or something like that. The sooner ahead of time you can be involved, that can usually help to make things more successful. Have a set contact person, again, in the number of emails, particularly the next one will be around follow-up information, but it can be really challenging to understand who a set contact person is. And it can be particularly confusing when you get multiple emails from multiple different people around the same contact. It's hard to know what's the most up-to-date information. Sometimes there's conflicting information between different individuals. So if you as a community group or organization in whatever format are able to have a set contact person and say, the contact person for this is Jenna. And so if you have any questions about our proposal, they should go to Jenna. That just helps on both sides to have clarity and kind of serve as a clearinghouse for that communication. Again, follow-up information. So, we can't always anticipate questions there might be. And so certainly there's cases where that follow-up happens and having that set contact person can be really useful. And understanding the most effective ways to share information. That might vary by town. So sometimes there's a set contact in a town, maybe it's a clerk, maybe it's a select board chair, but who would be a go-to person for sharing information with board members, for understanding how to get onto an agenda. So doing some research to understand, maybe talking informally with one or more of board members and saying, hey, if I was interested in sharing information, what's the most effective way for me to do that? That's at a really technical level, but also in some cases we've seen in communities that folks have set up really regular check-ins, and that's been an effective way to say, okay, quarterly, we would like to be on an agenda and provide an update. So that can be another way to kind of build in some of that structure. That is really my kind of just very high level information. The last one, written communication. Again, I mentioned emails, that can be a double-edged sword, but sometimes when you're going back and forth, it can be really nice to have a record of when a request came in, what it was asking for, if there is those additional clarifications or additional updates. You get the game of telephone with he said, she said, going back and forth. And so having something in writing about what a request or an update is always great to be able to go back to. So I'll turn it back over to Jenna. Certainly feel free to add any additional things, but just some kind of general practices from our work. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Alyssa. Yeah, and I'll just add, and Alyssa kind of alluded to this, but one thing I think is really important to note, I think, I'm looking around at the names on the screen here, and I'm seeing a lot of kind of, more community-based volunteers, but I'm seeing some folks that I know are also municipal leaders. And I just to kind of echo a couple of Alyssa's points, that like this engagement goes both ways, right? Like it's really, I think it's really important for all the reasons that Alyssa laid out, that community volunteers are informing, engaging with, cultivating relationships with municipal leadership, but also in the other direction, that municipal leaders, it can be really beneficial and valuable. I know that municipal leaders have so much on your plate that you're dealing with, just trying to get the job done that you've taken on. But community volunteers can help with, adding capacity to what's possible in your community, and can help to build support and engagement among your constituents. And so just to say that, like, I think that relationship building is really important in both directions. I think what we'll do, and I'm sure probably our two speakers will speak to that a little bit, serving in both of those roles. But Lindley, do you want to start us off with sharing your experience in Bethel?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and thank you all for being here and being willing to listen to what I have to say. A lot of what I'm going to say really will echo a lot of what Alyssa and Jenna have already said. And so Jenna kind of alluded to, I wear a lot of different hats in my community, and I really enjoy finding the intersection of my own interests, but also helping others find the intersections of their interests, and then helping them plug into the local community. And so my background is, I'm actually a traditionally trained furniture maker, and I'm also a teacher. I teach middle school shop at our local middle school. I also teach adult courses at Yes Tomorrow in Waitsfield. And then I'm also a business owner. And so, much like they've alluded to, I have a lot going on in my personal life, but I'm also really invested in my community. And so, as you know, I serve on the Bethel Select Board, but I actually came to be on the Select Board through community activism and engagement. And so my wife and I moved to Bethel about 10 years ago, and we really just needed a community closer to my furniture job at the time. And we were really struggling to find ways to get connected and meet new folks and get involved in our community. And so we got involved with the Bethel Revitalization Initiative, which runs Bethel University, which, if you're not familiar with it, you should check it out. It's a month-long pop-up university that is all free classes taught by the community for the community. From there, for me, it just kind of snowballed. As I was getting involved with BRI, they had just been awarded a grant for Better Block, which is kind of a cool way to do a pop-up transformation of your downtown or of a specific area. And it's a one weekend event where you really transform your downtown, but it actually takes months of planning. And so we got involved right at the beginning of that and got to really dig in with all of the community engagement and the community conversations. And it also meant getting to go to select board meetings, which for me was a first. And admittedly, I really didn't understand most of what was happening at that first meeting. And I remember feeling a little bit over my head, and we stayed for the whole meeting, and I listened and I absorbed, but I didn't take a lot away from it, and I didn't really even understand their process. And so then we went through Better Block, and a year or two later, BRI was awarded an animating infrastructure grant, which, if you've ever driven through Bethel, you've probably seen the giant fish mural that's on the wall coming into town. And so that was, that grant allowed us to install that mural. And I actually was on the installation team. So it was myself and one other person working directly with the artist to get the mural up on the wall. But what it really meant was we really had to dig into working with the municipality and working with larger state organizations to make sure we did that process appropriately. And so this was where I really kind of learned, this is how the select board works, and this is, you know, what's happening within the meetings, and then also, you know, some of the history and some of the background. And you know, admittedly, Bethel didn't have the best history with its select board, and it had some really major issues. And at the time that I was starting to learn about it, there was a big turnover with the board, and I spent a lot of time with the chair of the board really asking questions and kind of getting to know some of that history. And as he explained it to me, this board was really working to kind of right the ship and put Bethel back on track and take some of those practices that had kind of fallen by the wayside, or things that should be being done that weren't being done, and kind of really get it back on track and put things in a positive direction. And so I mostly was interested in learning and asking questions and kind of absorbing the information. And it happened that during that time, there was a member of the select board that resigned in the middle of her term, and the chair reached out to me and asked if I would consider being on the board. And so I put my name in and was given the opportunity to serve the community in a totally new capacity. And so for me, I came to the select board more from the community engagement side, and not so much from, you know, wanting to be in leadership or wanting to have control over anything. But I think it's given me a really different vantage point from some of the other members on our team. And it's also shown me the importance of really having understanding from both sides and taking the time to listen to each other and hear both what the community needs, but then also as a community member, being willing to listen to the select board members as to what parameters they're working within and what needs they're going to have, and how they're coming to decisions. And so in general, I think that we have a really positive board right now, and it's not always been the case in Bethel, but our board is really open-minded. We want to hear what residents need, what they want, what they're interested in. But then we have the job of weighing out what the town needs. So it's, you know, we want to hear what residents are interested in and need to do, but we also still have to weigh it out with, you know, what's legal, what's not legal, what are the parameters, sometimes that's financial, sometimes it's legal, sometimes it's purely about safety and security and insurance. And those are the hard lines that sometimes the select board has to say no to a project or no to an idea. But ultimately, I think a lot of it is that you want to hear both sides, and then you want to understand when a no has to happen, why did it have to happen? You know, and so I think a good example is in kind of both directions. If the select board just goes ahead and makes a decision and doesn't listen to or give space for residents' voices, it's going to be really upsetting to residents when all of a sudden a directive is coming down and they've had no chance to weigh in about it. But likewise, if a community group goes out and just starts doing things and hasn't asked for permission, it's going to make it really hard for that group to garner support in the future, but also for future groups to get support from the select board. And so it really has to be both parties coming together, both parties understanding that I may have my own wants and interests, but I need to work with the other side and kind of come to mutual agreements and come to terms with understanding the parameters that everybody's working within. And I wanted to give an example that was a multi-year process that Bethel has gone through and is still going through, which is we had a property owner, a landowner, who wanted to develop the piece of land that he owned and put a Dollar General on it. And he went to the DRB, and this is kind of what Alyssa was alluding to, like oftentimes all of these different entities within the municipality are interacting with one another, but they're also doing their own jobs, and sometimes you don't know what's going on. And so the landowner went to the DRB and was going through the process of getting the proper permits. And as residents started learning about his plans, there was a lot of pushback, and they really didn't want the development where he was planning to put it. Not because it's not a floodplain, but it's an area that locally is known for regular flooding, and people really just didn't want to see some big development with a lot of concrete going into an area that is known for flooding. So there was a significant amount of pushback, and over 2 or 3 years, there were different iterations of the plan, and the landowner, kept trying to push the development through, and there kept being a lot of pushback from residents and citizens. And eventually the select board got involved. The select board actually partnered with our conservation commission. And ultimately we ended up actually partnering with some larger state entities, our Economic Development Corp, as well as the White River Partnership. And we were able to purchase the land from the landowner, conserve the land, do some repair work to the riverbank that's there. And now we're in a phase where we are building trails on that land, and we've just received a huge grant that's going to not only expand our trails and connect them to other trails, but it's going to create access to the river for boating, and it's going to make the whole thing ADA accessible. So it was about 6 years in the making, and it took a lot of community partnerships, and it started as a really sort of embroiled process, but the end result has really, it's really amazing to see where we've gotten and what it took to get there, and to be a part of that, and to really understand how much you have to work with and partner with other entities, that it can't just be the select board alone, or the conservation commission alone, or the planning commission by themselves. It really has to be this sort of coming together, and that ultimately all of that was driven by resident voices. It was the community speaking out, and then those official capacities backing them up and hearing what they were saying and saying, you know what, even though that Dollar General would grow our grand list and it would be great for the town in terms of finances, it's not what our residents want, and we're going to back our residents. And so I think there's a lot in that you really have to, kind of understand all the parts and pieces, and be willing to listen, and be willing to collaborate, and be willing to compromise, because at the end of the day, that's how you're going to get to where you're going. And so much like what Alyssa shared, I wanted to just kind of go through, from my experience, some sort of tips and strategies of working with the select board specifically. And I kind of broke this into 3 parts. So there's like prior to your project, once you're in your project, and then, or once you have a project idea, and then once you're going with the project. And so prior to, just being known, being a voice, showing up at meetings, get to know your select board, get to know your town management. It doesn't have to be with anything specific in mind or with any goals, but just being a physical presence and a face that they know, or a name that they see every so often, it's going to help you a lot in the long run, and a lot of towns are more and more starting to have hybrid options. That's great, like for attending meetings, and our town has now officially adopted a hybrid option, and we have some regular folks who come who previously wouldn't have been able because of childcare, or needing, to get home and make dinner, and the timing of meetings. So if you can sign in from home and listen to a meeting, they're going to see your name, or they're going to see your face if you're able to put your video on. But also physically being present. I feel like it's really sad and lonely when you're a select board of 5 sitting in a room with nobody there, and we love when people come, and it gives us a chance to kind of get to know those individuals and ask, how was your day, or what do you do for work? And so those sorts of things, and creating that relationship before you have an ask is actually going to go so much further than you have any idea. So just showing up, being a voice. Also, familiarize yourself with how your select board works. Ours is unique. It does its own thing. And I've learned that from going to other meetings, going, wow, we really do it differently than others. And so I can't tell you how your select board works or wants to be interacted with. I can tell you how ours does. And when residents come to me, I'll often advise them and say, get us information ahead of time. Don't come to a meeting. The worst thing you can do is come to a meeting with a 10-page packet and put it in front of me, and then want to have a discussion about that 10-page packet that I haven't read. I can't both read it and listen to your presentation and then have a productive discussion. I need to have read the information beforehand. Then you're there in front of me presenting your ideas. It reminds me, oh, right, I read about that. Oh yeah, that was that thing I wanted to ask that question about. And then we'll have a conversation, and then it'll be more productive. You're going to walk away with probably more of the answers that you need, or at least having been able to ask the select board questions that you weren't sure about. And likewise, the select board's going to be able to ask you questions. Hey, in this one part, I wasn't sure about this, or do you, this might not meet our legal parameters. Do you think this is something you can change? And so it's going to drive that conversation to the next level. Whereas unfortunately, and I've seen it one too many times, of people coming in wanting to discuss their project and the select board has no clue what they're talking about, and we actually have to bump them to a different meeting. So now you've wasted your time showing up to a meeting that you're just going to have to show up to 2 weeks from now. And so getting more information out ahead of time, but also learning what it is and how the board wants to be interacted with. Ours prefers that you send everything to the town manager and she disseminates information to us. And so instead of, much like that one point of contact that Alyssa was recommending, it works in both ways. We don't want citizens emailing all of us a ton of information. We want to receive it all in one place so it didn't get lost in that lineup of emails. You know, we just know this is my packet, this is what I have to read. And, you know, for the most part, I would say I read everything in my packet, and I'm sure that the majority of select board members, it's a commitment you make. You want to know, you want to be engaged, you want to be informed. And so the more information you get out front of the conversation, the more productive the conversation can be. And then, you know, don't be afraid to talk to select board members individually. Our information is made public for a reason, and sometimes you know people and sometimes you don't, but I think sometimes people are wary of approaching select board members, and the reality is we're all part of your community and we're engaged because we want to be engaged, not because we want to hide up in the hills, right? And so don't be afraid to talk to people individually. You might actually find that you can kind of get more support on that individual level, or have that quiet conversation and get them on your team. So then when you go to the meeting, you actually have a couple allies in the room at the same time, and they can also speak to the other members and say, well, actually, I've had this conversation and I really think what they're doing is, you know, going to be beneficial for these reasons. So you'll end up having that greater support if you've kind of approached people individually. The other thing that I would say is ask for permission, even if you don't need to. It just garners that support where you're saying, look, I'm respecting your role. And instead of coming and telling you what I'm going to do, I want to know that it's okay for me to do it. And I want to know that if there's some hang up that you're going to find 10 steps down the road, I want to know it today before we start the process. And so by going and kind of putting it out there and asking for permission, even if at the end of the day, the select board says, well, you actually don't need our permission. You can go do this on your own. You've now bought their support, because they now see you as somebody who's an ally to them in their process, as opposed to, well, they just went out and did this thing and didn't consider our needs. You know, you've considered their needs and you've put the town in that position to say yay or nay before it's even necessary. And then once you're in a project, once you're like full on going, check in, let the select board know what's going on. Don't assume that they understand or know, you know, or have read every newspaper article or seen every email that's been sent, but go and check in, tell them the positives, tell them the negatives. Sometimes it's actually better to get ahead of the negatives than have them find out something through the rumor mill. And I think we're all part of small towns and we know how it works. And, you know, frankly, if I have a resident come up to me frustrated or angry about something they saw going on, and I'm able to say, oh yes, I actually know all about this project, let me tell you about it, I'm going to be able to get them on your side. Whereas if that same resident came up frustrated and I have no clue what they're talking about, they're probably going to convince me to be frustrated too. And so if you come in ahead of any problems or saying, hey, we're a little worried, here's this thing happening, we just wanted you aware of it, we want to hear if you have any feedback, maybe something we should or shouldn't do to help handle it. You know, it gives them that kind of heads up on, hey, this might be coming down the road and it might come across your plate at some point, as opposed to, you know, walking around a corner and bumping into an issue is always harder.
Say it 50 million times, Sadie.
And then the final thing would be just to like really have realistic expectations. Select board members are humans. They're also part of your community. They're most often volunteers, and they have a lot of other things going on. We often care about the town. It's why we've chosen to do these roles, and it's not an easy role. You end up getting a lot of frustrations from people, and you have to, you know, listen to all of those things. But sometimes when we have those lofty expectations from residents, it actually makes it harder to want to support them. And I think that the few cases where I've seen real downfall with community projects has been when they want the select board to just clear everything through and say yes to everything, and they're not willing to compromise, and they're not willing to be realistic about the true role of the select board, which is to help the town function and to keep the town and the residents sort of safe and fiscally responsible and moving forward and meeting all the legal parameters from the state. And if you can't do that with your project, then you need to be ready to compromise. And if you're not ready to compromise, you won't end up with support from your select board. And so ultimately, really all it comes down to is communication, collaboration, and being willing to compromise. And so that's sort of what I have to say about that. But thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lindley. And I'll just say, like, as an outsider from Bethel, like, it's just been really, really cool over the years to watch that transformation from this like scrappy group of local volunteers with the revitalization initiative to now this, town-wide effort to kind of, work together for the future of the community. And everyone's talking about Bethel. I just was remembering last night in Brownington, Bethel University came up as, this cool thing that's going on in another town. So thank you for sharing that experience. Also, so far, my favorite quote from this workshop is select board members are humans. Always a good reminder. But thank you so much. And I will turn it over to Michael to share your experience around the recreation work in Bradford.
How's it going, everyone? I'm Michael Wright. I'm an active member for our Bradford Parks and Recreation Commission. And I'm also the chair to that newly created Parks and Recreation Task Force. Both roles pretty much are similar, but different. We both focus on improving and expanding our parks and recreational programming in Bradford. The task force is slightly different. We're not a municipality, so we don't have to follow necessarily the same open meeting laws and such that we do at the commission level. And we're able to have many different special meetings with different groups. So that kind of helps us. We also lately have been reached out through the task force from our neighboring communities to work with Bradford as a recreation hub. Where we're at in Bradford, we're right off the interstate. So our neighboring towns really come to our community looking for recreational activities because we have that much more to offer. So we have a responsibility not just to our community, but also those that visit our community. I strongly believe and feel that through recreational activities, people will come visit your community, which helps your overall economic development. People come here to visit your parks, walk on your trails, then they're going to shop and eat at your local stores and restaurants. In the past year, we've been extremely busy in recreation in Bradford. One of the things that I constantly have to remind myself is slow down. I work as a construction superintendent, so managing projects is really what I do on a day-to-day basis. But realizing that other people may be having a full-time job that not necessarily can meet the time. So if I get in a hurry, just realize that other people around me that are involved may not have, all that free time, so to speak, because we all volunteers. In the past year, I'll just tell you quickly about some projects that we've done, how we've done it, and what we've learned from it, or what I've learned from it. This is since March of last year. We've constructed a 40-foot by 100-foot open pavilion over our ice skating rink. We found in the past that it was more time consuming to shovel it off than having a canopy over it. So we have a pavilion over it, which has increased I'd say doubled our usage of the ice skating rink. The local neighboring town in Fairleigh, Vermont has a lake. That was, when it would have a rainstorm, ice storm, the local inn there, Lake Maury Inn, was sending people to Bradford to use our ice skating rink because it knows that was in a good shape. Where it's also now we've had, I think, 13 or 14 reservations just for birthday parties. We have a bank that's going to be hosting an event there. So this became a pretty good project for our community. Other ones is I've gotten approval from our select board to move forward with a 10 league-sized horseshoe pits that's in a fenced-in area. So it's a new horseshoe park that will be league-sized, and there's already a league that's interested in utilizing the space. for new tournaments and such. We've also got approval for an 18,000 square foot dog park. And that was challenged in its own, just getting the right location and talking with the insurance companies and such. Recently, we just got approval for 1,200 lineal feet of riverside walking trails with jet outs for fishing, and 1,200 lineal foot of boardwalk trails through the wetland area. Other projects that we're working on right now that are in the planning phases is updating our outdoor recreation center. Our new ball fields, basketball court. Currently, we have a tennis/pickleball court and some other amenities, soccer fields. So we have a plan, revamp that up. And the other big one that came out from the task force creation is a 7,000 square foot skate park. That skate park is actually now, it's taking us 3 months just to get, 4 months probably, to get through the planning phase. Now we've got the proposal in front of our select board that's going May 12th for them to review. And then we'll end up voting on that for approval. The big thing that's came up at the last select board meeting when they voted approval for the trails was, this seems like a lot of projects. Do you guys think that you've got enough people to do this? And what I constantly remind them is, it's getting approval for these projects so they're on the books. Because at different times, different grants become available. So you want to make sure that if there's a grant that comes available, you have something potential that you could apply for that grant. For instance, these recreational trails, we just did a letter of interest for a RTP grant, and we got approved to go on to the application process. If we did not have any trails on the books, then that would be a missed opportunity for funding to help with that. That next year, if we were to start that and there's no funding, then it may have put that project off a little bit further. So always, getting ahead. I've got probably 8 years worth of projects that we have listed that will get approved, and then we'll plug away with them over the time. The big thing that municipal and volunteer coordination communication is very important, not just for the community, but for the work that I'm doing. Getting the community input and their volunteer outreach and involvement gives you that great support group. I'm not saying that that gives you 20 people that you can show up to a select board meeting to say, hey, these people want it, you have to do it, because that, in my opinion, is the wrong way to go about it. As Lindsay said, getting the select board involved, it really helps that cause. If they feel their backs up against the wall or they're being attacked, that doesn't help anybody. Working with other municipal groups, such as the Planning Commission, Conservation Commission, your zoning administrator, even your town treasurer, about getting informed on what you need to do for grants and hiring different contractors, working with your town clerk, everybody else is involved, other groups that are volunteers that are created in your community that could be assets to help you, not just do the work, but also they may have insight. For instance, our planning commission is working on a town plan. So when we do stuff, different recreational trails or parks, we want to make sure that kind of fits in with their town plan. The trails that we're doing, I'm working with our conservation commission, because our conservation commission is very familiar on trail building. They're also familiar on the different species of vegetation and how to protect those, and different ways to build these trails that are ADA compliancy. Getting your treasurer involved early, saying, hey, we're doing these trails, we're going to apply, do a letter of interest for this grant. What do I need from you? So if we do get approved, we move forward. And that was great. When we got this RTP grant, I've got our insurance information. It just made it so once the application process got opened, I had everything that I needed. So getting people involved early is great. One of the biggest challenges that I found over the past year is time. Like I mentioned, everybody's got different times allotted. Your volunteers, some people may only do 5 hours a week. Some may only be able to do an hour a week. But just know that when you send out an email asking questions, and if you don't get an answer right back, just be patient. It's not that people are ignoring you. It's just not everybody lives by their, cell phones or emails to, quickly respond. I know some folks who have emails, but they still have flip phones. So they don't get their emails to their phones, and they don't get their emails until the end of the day when they get home from work. So Sending multiple emails saying, hey, did you get this? Did you get this? That, really doesn't work. Just a couple of things that I've done to help with these projects is, doing your homework. For instance, the dog park. And we knew that our community wanted a dog park. We had the task force members help out. We said, okay, what do we think that we're going to need? So we got, we worked with the town treasurer. She got us input with and set up a meeting with our insurance company. One of the big things on every meeting is to invite your select board to the meetings. Through this meeting, I had 2 select board members that came to the meeting. They asked questions. And what that does is that limits your time at a select board meeting because they already have this information. The walking trails are through wetlands and it's also a floodplain area. So doing the homework, having special meetings, which I did with our state wetlands manager, floodplain manager, finding all the rules and guidelines that we need to follow. Their recommendations, they were very helpful. They actually gave us instructions on their best practices on building these trails through wetlands. Getting neighboring landowners involved to make sure they're okay with the excess traffic that might be going through their property now. This trail program is shared. It's partly on town-owned property and partly on school property. So I had to attend several different school board meetings and propose the plan and talk with them. So I did all of that homework prior to doing a proposal to the select board. They know it's coming because I involve them with every meeting throughout the way as soon as I start the process. So the walking trails, for instance, started in October of last year, and we just got approval 2 weeks ago. That's how long, you can expect some of these projects to take. So once the homework's done, it's proper planning. So, that's getting all your costs associated, doing a well-written proposal, kind of spell everything out to try to answer as many questions as you can. I have been working with our select board. I treat them as individuals a lot of the times, not necessarily select board members. So I'll email them as in a group and say, hey, this is what I've got coming your way. Is there anything that you see that might be missing, or any answers or concerns that you may have that I can fix on my proposal before I send it to you as an official discussion at a town meeting, at a select board meeting. Involving the rest of your members. So like I said, I'm on the Parks and Recreation Commission, making sure that when you're doing a meeting, you're inviting all of them, taking notes, saving the notes on a share file, so everybody knows what's being said at these meetings, because again, not everybody can attend these meetings. Also, these notes that I've saved helped in the proposal for the trails because they're emails and notes for meetings. You have a meeting in person with someone, and if you don't take the notes, then it becomes hearsay. So really taking the proper notes is really good for your planning. In a clear and clean proposal, I just did one for the skateboard park that's coming over, and it lists, reasons why they're beneficial. It has the blueprints. It has 6 different letters from the community. And what's more important is we made sure that they were teenagers. The teenagers really wanted this project. And we said, look, let's get involved. You guys write a letter. Let's help design this park. So it's showing that they're not just saying, hey, we want this. It shows the select board member and the community as a whole, because you're going to be looking at the community to help fund your projects, whether it's through taxes or donations. It shows them that not just do they want it, but they're willing to get their hands dirty and get this thing done. So what I usually do, what's been helpful with my proposals, is I'll create a proposal like the skateboard park. I'll send it to the select board now and have it on the agenda in 2 weeks at their first meeting as an informal meeting, where we'll talk about it, answer any questions I can, give time enough for the community to ask any questions. At that time, at the end of the meeting, that's when I'll decide how much more work do we need on this proposal. Then it'll either go back to the select board again at a select board meeting for another discussion, or if they have all their answers questioned, then I would ask 1 month from that meeting, so 4 weeks from the first meeting, to vote on it. And that gives a good month for any other questions that they may come up, because what I hate doing is I hate rushing the select board to make a decision, and then all of a sudden, oh wait, we forgot about this, or oh wait, we didn't dot this I and cross this T. That okay, now our insurance may change. And what we found is, you know, what do we have to ensure? And we just don't want anything missing, because it's always bad to go backwards. And one example is our dog park. We got approval to put a dog park at a location. I missed one important contact, and that was our local town highway department. The local town highway department stores the downtown snow storage exactly where I wanted to put the dog park. And I can't take that away from them. So we were going to relocate the dog park to a second location, and everything is great. Then we found that it's too close to the wetlands and permitting fees were through the roof, and it just wasn't going to work. So then we moved it to the third and final location that works. If I had taken and just slowed down a little bit, and this is what I recommend, and just making sure you involve every municipality like your town highway, you don't miss those, because when you announce that, hey, dog park's been approved, it's going here, everyone's excited, and then all of a sudden, oh wait, no, it's not going there, we got to move it. People then start wondering, hey, what's going on? So really getting everybody involved, and that's where, you know, Lindley made it very important. If you get the select board involved early, or either of these other town municipalities, they may know something that you don't know. You know, Conservation Commission, we're doing some trails, and the one that runs our Conservation Commission, the chair, is very knowledgeable. And she says, well, 16 years ago, we got approved with a buffer going around the perimeter of this property line. They do trails. We can do some there. And I'm like, okay, I never knew that. So really talking with, when you have an idea, is as many people as you think can get involved. And then again, be respectful of the select board's time to vote. Make sure you give them plenty of time to vote. Try not to rush them, because if you rush them, like I said, they feel their backs in the walls. They don't have enough information. They may vote for something they're unsure of, or they may say no, not realizing that what they're voting against. And then what that does is all of a sudden, then you get some community members involved that are now going against select board members, putting letters to the editors and different things like that. So if you get a strong community that's on board, say for horseshoes, and all of a sudden you have a couple select board members that say no because they don't understand it all, then you get community members, oh, this person said no, they must hate horseshoes. And it's not that, they just don't have enough information to make a vote at that time. And
Michael,
really, yes.
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off because you have such a wealth of
Yep.
tips on this, but we are at 11 and I want to make sure we have time for breakouts. But if you have like one or two last tips, then.
Yeah, just one more example of getting the select board involved and other municipalities. When we were going for our horseshoe approval, everyone was in the community. Some of them were like, oh no, horseshoes wouldn't go good at our children's park. It just doesn't fit in there. And we're like, we wanted an inclusive park. One of the select board members actually found in the vault from when the park was originally built 35 years ago, a blueprint and a letter that stated the park was always originally intended to have horseshoes there. So by getting them involved, that helped us get these horseshoes. So thanks.
Awesome, thank you so much. So Lindley and Michael, thanks so much for sharing your experience. So helpful to kind of have that framing. Michael, I did notice there's somebody in the chat who's looking to contact you. And so if you're comfortable, either we could, you could private chat or just plug your email into the chat there to reach out. So we're at 11. I know some people may need to go off to a next meeting. For those of you that have a half an hour to stick around and want to kind of dig into this a little bit more with each other, we are going to take a little bit of time for some breakout conversations. Before we do, I think we'll probably take about like 15 minutes for those. I do want to leave a few minutes if anyone has like burning questions that you want to ask of Michael or Lindley or Alyssa. We probably have time for maybe one or two. And you can either kind of like wave at me if you're on camera, or if you want to use the raised hand function in reactions. If you click on reactions, there's a raise hand button. Does anyone have a question that you want to draw out from one of those folks before we dive into breakout conversations? Not seeing any. Well, let's take the time to have these individual conversations. So our plan, I think, Alyssa, maybe we do 3 groups. And just because I see you both at the top of my screen, Alyssa and Jessica, if you want to lead a couple of those others. what we're going to do is break out into conversations to just have a chance to talk about what challenges, you heard the challenges and the solutions that Michael and Lindley have found, but you might have similar or totally different challenges that you're experiencing in your own communities about making these connections and engaging between community groups and municipal leaders. So we're going to break out into 3 groups. I'll be in one, Alyssa will be in one, and Jessica will be in the third. And we're going to just take about, why don't we take, what do you think, 15 minutes, Alyssa? 18 minutes? To answer a few questions. The challenges that you're experiencing with municipal connections in your own community, workshopping solutions and ideas together, what's worked for you, and kind of, or just thinking about potential ideas for the folks that bring up these challenges, and then some key takeaways from the speaker or this conversation. Maybe, what are the things you might adopt in your own communities? And we'll put those questions into the chat so that you'll be able to see them when we get to the breakout. Or in the little announcement in the breakout conversations once we get there. Are we ready to break off into groups, Alyssa?
Yeah, I'll just be 1 more minute to sort folks. Thanks.
And maybe I'll put these questions in the chat now, so you have a moment to reflect on them before we head off into groups. So again, it's the challenges that you're experiencing with municipal connections in your own community, workshopping solutions and ideas together, and then key takeaways from speakers or from the conversation. And I don't know, Lindley and Michael, are you able to stick around for these breakouts?
Yeah.
Okay. And Alyssa, maybe split. Zoom countdown's always kind of daunting. All of a sudden we get tossed back in. So I'll just open it up. We're going to close in just a couple minutes here, but does anybody have any key kind of takeaways or things that you would plan to bring back to your own communities, or summary points from the conversations that you want to share?
Hi, just one thing, advocacy and joining in discussions is very important and very helpful and very useful. And also, I encourage folks to learn more about farm worker housing and the developments that are going on. Champlain Housing Trust has a new thing on farm worker housing, same as Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. So always learn more and engage in advocacy is always important, and learn from your neighbors and include them, because there's so many that are left out of the conversations. So thank you, folks, and happy May Day.
Thanks, Buster. Todd. Hey, Todd.
Hello, folks. Todd Manise. I work in the Vermont Rivers program. I don't work for the town of Plymouth, where we live. I joined this because I deal with municipalities all the time. I thought, got to be able to learn something out of this, and I got a lot. Thank you very much. There was early on in the presentation, I don't remember who it was, communicate early. And I'm going to say communicate early and often. And it works the same way with us as it does with the towns. Getting a first communication, maybe an agenda follows, but anyway, all of these same things, use them with whatever state of you need to deal with. Communication is our most difficult part of our human existence. Use it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Todd. Any other last observations in the last minute or so? I think we can go to Matthew and Michael, and then we're gonna have to wrap. We've got 2 minutes, so we'll have to be really quick.
Yeah. This is Matthew. What I can take away from this is, like what Todd had said, it's just, that communication piece, but also that accessibility piece among those 3 pillars, because you got the economic piece, viability piece, and the community piece. They're all 3 pillars that to hold that foundation of, other, how to present these, discussions and issues within the community. But yeah, I'm taking away with lots of information. Thank you for, providing that information to me. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Matthew. Michael, did you take your hand down or do you have one last?
I was supposed to hit thumbs up to Todd's thing.
Oh,
and I
okay.
hit my hand. Yeah, definitely. The point is to communicate often is even once you get approval to move forward with a project, before you start building it, go back to your select board while it's being built, after it's built, everyone that you've worked with throughout the project, because it'll help you throughout the whole thing. And then understanding your local municipality and how they work, whether it's town manager, administrator, or select board member.
Or city manager as well. I'm seeing Tess and Barry City there and realizing, I don't think we've said the word city council yet in this, but similarly. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank everybody. If you're not a member of the network, please click on that link in the chat and join us. Also a little plug to mark your calendars for August 10th for the Vermont Community Leadership Summit. We're hoping to bring together 500 to 600 Vermonters to discuss and tackle issues like this and many others. And you're all invited to join us in Randolph at BTC. So more to come on that. And we'll be in touch with some follow-up and a chance to share some feedback as well. And happy Friday, everybody. Enjoy your day and your weekend. Hopefully we'll see you next time at the next Leadership Network workshop.